Hello and welcome to another presentation of Faces of the Main Line. Our guest today is author and entrepreneur Leia. She's written a book and we're going to be discussing some parts of that. Leia, hello and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining me today. What I'd like you to do is tell me about yourself first.
Okay. I am an author, an entrepreneur, and a Rotarian. And I tell you Rotarian because I am an activist and enjoy doing good things for good people, as we Rotarians do. As a young woman, I started my career as an administrative assistant, and I worked my way up to the programming department to becoming one of the first female programmers at MasterCharge. From there, I started my own two companies in the world of computers. I am a positive person, so it would stand to reason that I have a benevolent view of the universe. I love this world, and I have a quest for joy for myself and for all those around me. What is predominant, though, is that I have a passion for virtue and a love for philosophy. Through my studies and my worldwide travel, both far and near, I came to the conclusion that all human beings are the same. We all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted, acknowledged, and appreciated by our fellow man. When Your Family Says No is a memoir that tells you that every person has a right to their own life, regardless of what their parents, their teachers, or the leaders of the community had designed for them. We are born to ourselves, we belong to ourselves, and we have the right to our own being. This memoir will take you on a journey to the right to that life, to fulfillment, to joy, to freedom, and to happiness. From a family who said no to a family that said yes.
You've created, in reading your book, a very intriguing story. And for me, it was educational and informative. Mm-hmm. And if I think this is the right time to have you read some part of your book to give the audience a little more of an understanding of where we're going with this.
Sure.
Please
I can start now. This will show you the impact of the family I come from and how the father in the family has control over all of the children. So John and I had been together for 4 years.
John is
the man that I married and fell in love with, who was not Jewish. After coming home from an ordinary day of work, everything seemed normal. I hung my coat in the woman's closet and washed my hands in the bathroom. I recited the blessing on my way to the kitchen, where my mother was waiting with my hot dinner. "Leia," she said, but she didn't turn from the stove. I heard something ominous in her tone. I watched my mother set down my dinner in front of me. I waited. She sat down across from me, her face grave. "Your father would like to come to your office tomorrow and see it for himself. He would like to meet your boss." Nausea washed over me. My father walked through the glass doors of our front lobby the next morning. John greeted him with a strong handshake, which my father returned in kind. I remembered the first time I had met John and how taken aback he was by my own firm handshake. "Who taught you how to shake hands?" he asked after the interview was over. I never knew there was any other way. Have a seat, Mr. Steinberg, John offered. They sat down at John's desk and began to converse, out of range of my hearing. I sat at my desk and pretended to work, my heart in my throat. I counted the seconds, each one longer than the next. What am I doing here? How did I allow this to happen? Finally, after what felt like a century, John rose. Thank God it's over. What should I do? What should I say? Somehow, my father left the office and I began to breathe again. Your father is an interesting man. He has a strong business sense, John said to me after he left. What? Your father. I admire what he's accomplished. I sat in shock at John's relaxed demeanor, surprised that the world continued to turn. That night, I went home to my mother's hot dinner. She put my food on the table and sat across from me. Your father did not like your boss. Little more was said. I was used to not disclosing my emotions. The mask I donned to disguise my discomfort at the entire situation was firmly rooted, but the terror that gripped me inside felt like a tightly drawn corset that got tighter and tighter with each breath I attempted to take. It took me an entire month to calm down. John tried to assuage my fears with reason. He hasn't done anything, John said. He hasn't even spoken to you. Besides, he doesn't have to like me, only to respect me. And the most convincing argument of all, your father is losing control of you, and he knows it. He came here hoping to find something truly terrible so he could take you back. But he only found me. And I wasn't the monster he expected. Now he doesn't know what to do. If my father's faculties hadn't been clouded by rage, he would have noticed, and it would have been the end. If my mother had been the one to visit, she would have caught sight of John's photo on the shelf adjacent to my desk, which I had forgotten to remove. She had been madly in love with my father at my age. She knew the signs, but she hadn't visited, so that day I got away with it. But I knew our secret couldn't last. I felt the walls closing in on us. I was still under their rule, both emotionally, practically. They knew something was going on. They just didn't know exactly what. Were they following me? How could they not know? Surely the end was near.
That's powerful. And there's some, I particularly picked up on shock, breathing again. Your father was ultra-Orthodox?
Yes, he was a fundamentalist Orthodox Jew. And he came from a Hasidic background. But the key is that he was an Orthodox fundamentalist Jew. And there are many different types of fundamentalist Jews. But the key is that you follow the Torah and you are fundamentalists in your quest to serve God. Because
your life is the afterlife.
You're born to die. And that's kind of harsh, but we live to go to heaven. Our purpose on life is to serve God and go to heaven. That is the purpose of life.
You struggled with this as an early age.
At an early age, I had many, many questions. I couldn't understand why there would be a God that would create the world and then everyone dies. What would be the purpose of his creating the world? The other struggle I had, which was even stronger, was why are we here? Why would God make this world? To serve him. If God is not human and he is forever and he created everything and he was never born and he will never die, what's his purpose? Why? I couldn't grasp the reasons that God would need us to serve him if he wasn't human. Why would he have human needs at all in the first place? And what was everything all about? And why? That's what I struggled with as a child. But I was definitely in the program, believed in God, and thought that I should serve God, but I didn't know why.
And you practiced all of the ultra-Orthodox practices. You're
all the
putting
rituals.
Your clothes on, starting with the right, taking your clothes off with the left, the constant praying over and the Fridays. And it seems like, I don't want to get too far afield, it seems like, well, I don't understand why men play such a dominant role in religion. And I'm saying that as a male.
Okay. I can explain that to you. First of all, the world had to start that way even before Judaism began, because someone had to bring the food home and someone else had to maintain the household. One person couldn't do it all. And that's how male dominance started. But within Judaism, we don't learn that the male is dominant in that way. We learn that a man has one role and a woman has another role. And one is not better than the other. But it's very contradictory, because a woman's reward is based on her husband's studying of the Torah. And so if her husband studies the Torah and becomes a great man, then she gets her part in the world to come based on his performance in this world.
I see it as a lot simpler. In my own, and I don't, just briefly, I see it that as women are very, very powerful.
Yes.
Men are threatened by women.
Yes.
Women have been a threat to man intellectually and sexually. And that's how I see it. And,
Yes.
And men, some men, unfortunately, are incapable of dealing with that.
That's right.
So they find it important that they suppress women to a level.
Yes.
And I, as I was reading your book, those thoughts, I'm a Christian, so those thoughts were conjured up in me about that. You really went out on a limb, involving with a John, and not being a Jew. How did you? What happened there?
How did
when
I
your family
grapple
says
with
no?
it?
I mean, that's the title of the book.
Exactly. You might ask me, how did I grapple with it? And I couldn't. I had a struggle. Right. For 6 years, I struggled. I'm doing something wrong, but I'm going to stop. I dated for many years and had more than many suitors. And each time I would date somebody, I had no interest in them because I was fully in love with my husband. He wasn't my husband at the time. And every couple of months, I would say, well, this is going to end. I'm going to end it in a couple of months. And then I'll marry the right person and go on with my life. And every couple of months, I couldn't end it. I would say, well, I'll end it in another couple of months. And this went on and on and on for 5 years. And that's how I grappled with it, that I was going to stop. I was going to end it. I could never dream of marrying my husband. I wouldn't dream of it. It was impossible. It was totally impossible. And then it happened.
And you did.
And I did.
And what did your family do next?
My family did not accept me. I was excommunicated by my family, my parents, my siblings, everyone in the community. I had no contact with anyone that I had contact with before I married John. That was the greatest sin in the world. It is the only thing that is totally 100% unacceptable. If I murdered someone, I'd be punished and back into the community. But marrying outside your religion, that's 100% unacceptable.
Your book actually reminded me of one of my favorite movies, Fiddler on the Roof.
Yes.
And Topol turns to
Yes.
and you're dead to me. And he could never acknowledge his daughter. And I envisioned that's what it was like.
That's right.
For you.
It was. It is a modern day version of Fiddler on the Roof.
And your family spied on you.
Yes. My father hired investigators from the moment he found out that I left for Reno and got married. He had investigators on me almost my entire life until he moved to Israel and he passed away.
You seem to express a lot of pain for your mother in the book.
I had pain because after I married my husband, my mother came to me and she said, "You were the only one of my children that I never worried about. I never had to worry that you would do something wrong." And I missed it.
But she knew the man she married. And if you don't mind me saying it appears as though your father had a violent temper.
My father had a temper when he couldn't control someone or something. Other than that, in my household, there was no temper. He never displayed a temper in my household growing up. And he burst. When I married my husband, he completely burst. And you'll see violence in the book, in one of the chapters, because he had totally lost control. For the first time in his life, he couldn't control me. And that's what happened.
I would say that your father didn't have outbursts in your house because he had everything under control.
Perhaps.
And then once you showed up,
this was totally unexpected.
Yeah. At this stage in your life, why did you write the book?
I wrote the book for a few reasons. I wrote the book to show the world, or to tell the world, that everyone has a right to their own life, regardless of how you want them to be. Each person is an individual in themselves, and they have a right to their own life. I also wrote the book because I have a passion for virtue, and I want to teach the world to be virtuous, because virtue is good morality. And if we have good morality, we can have joy and real happiness, and the world would be a better place to be. If you have a child and you bring a child in the world, you owe that child to protect them physically, their body, and to protect their souls from harm. And you don't have a right to throw them away. You simply do not have the right to throw them away. And I wanted people to read this book. The book is sad and courageous. It has fortitude and love. And it's basically based on love. So I want the world to read this, see this, and realize what's important in the world, why we're here, and how to enjoy the world. And if someone does not align with your thoughts, you have to accept them and bless them on their own journey.
Would you have written a book if your parents were alive?
I may have written it, but I would not publish it while they were alive. I would not publish a book while they were alive.
I would say, this is my own perspective, that you probably could be viewed as a threat to certain organizations
Yes.
and groups. Are you?
Yes, yes. And that is the reason why my siblings would eschew me, because I'm a nice person. I'm a virtuous person. And should their children see a nice person and a virtuous person, they would wonder, well, what's the meaning of life? And maybe it's not so bad to not be locked into a religious community. And when I had children, which is my regret of not doing anything about it, but while I had children, my siblings would not allow their children to know my children, because I had sweet children, virtuous children, and nice children. So there would be a conflict there. What do they do? And my regret is not being outspoken and telling them what you're doing is not virtuous. You don't have a right to do that. You don't have a right to exclude my children just because their father is not Jewish.
Do you speak in front of Jewish groups?
Yes, I do.
How do they receive you?
The Jewish groups that I speak in front of are not Orthodox fundamentalist Jews. They receive me very well. They are either secular Jews, Reform Jews, or conservative Jews.
I'm sure the ultra-Orthodox they would feel...
I don't think they would be allowed to read the book.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yes.
You mentioned your siblings, and I know I read the book, so I know what went on. Maybe you could tell. What is your relationship with your siblings now?
I have always had a relationship with my siblings. Each sibling was different. I, as an individual, they would talk to and see. But my husband was never allowed in anybody's house. And everything was conditional. So everything was, when are you coming back? They never gave up on that. Now, I did have siblings in other countries that probably weren't allowed to talk to me. My sister, for example, in Israel, she wasn't allowed to talk to me. And so she didn't. And the other siblings, they just thought I lived a life of sin. They thought I was living a life of sin. And they couldn't accept me the way I was.
It took an incredible amount of strength to do what you did, considering that you were, from a child, you're brought up in a certain way. Your father was a successful businessman.
Yes.
And he supported your sister
Yes.
in what, one in Canada and one in Israel?
Yes.
Is that part
and one in New York.
Is that part of an arrangement?
That's an arrangement that goes on now in the yeshiva world. And the yeshiva world is a world of where Jewish religious boys sit and study the Torah the entire day, from early in the morning until late at night. That's what they do. Aside from praying 3 times a day, they are studying the Torah, the Talmud, all day long. And that's what their job is. So when they get married, the next generation above them, the ones who are successful in business, support them. and they will support them for 5 years or maybe 10. Usually it's 5 years, and then the young men go out and get a job. The world is forever changing. And when I was a young girl, going to college was taboo. But now the young girls are taught a lot. They go to college, they get degrees, they get PhDs, they get many degrees, they start their own companies, and they're out in the working world, and they support the husbands. So they have the children, and they support the husbands. Only when their fathers are not so successful and cannot afford to support their husbands.
This certainly must have pained you tremendously that your mother and your father really never embraced your children, and just as human beings,
Yes.
you know, they would embrace a stranger on the street, but because you were excommunicated, they couldn't embrace your children.
Right.
Actually, in the Christian world, I know people that were excommunicated because they didn't marry Catholics.
Yes.
So when using the word excommunication, and I'm well aware of that. Somebody married a Lutheran,
Yes.
or something, you know.
How foolish it is.
Yeah, exactly.
How foolish it is.
And they weren't, you know. So how did you overcome that loss of you're never being able to talk to your parents again, and you're viewed as a sinner?
I would visit my mother. I would go and visit my mother. I had 3 children, and I never exposed them to her because I didn't want to hurt her. Had I told her about my children, she would have given up hope. So when I went to visit my mother for the day, and we would go out to a restaurant, the next people would see me. The next day she would get phone calls. We have a boy for your daughter. We have a terrific match. And she just accepted those phone calls. They didn't know I was married, much less have 3 children. And I never wanted that hope to die. And I never told her about my children because I thought it would really destroy her. And as you read the book, you will see why she found out, how she found out. And my children, we did come to visit very seldom. We may have been there maybe 4 times. They didn't know how to handle it. They just didn't know how to handle it. They were frozen in fear.
I don't want to tell the whole story, but I was just so mesmerized by some of the things. Because as I said earlier, it was educational, informative for me.
Yes.
As old as I am, you can always learn something.
Right.
And the thing that was most amazed me, other than people spying on you,
Yes.
that most amazed me was the charade you had to put on
Yes.
to go back and live in your parents' house and act like you were a single woman so that your parents could save face.
Right.
That was amazing.
Right. That was when my brother was getting married. Well, that one time my brother was getting married, and he didn't know that I was married. And of course, the girl's family didn't know. And if they found out, they were very frightened that they would find out. So I would go home, and my sister would say, "Take your rings off." When my other sister came in from Israel, she didn't know. They were afraid to tell her I had to take my rings off. When my grandmother was in a hospital dying, and I got to the hospital door, my sister would come over and say, "Did you take your rings off?" It was sad.
Truly, the story is I would recommend it to anyone to read your book. Is there anything that you'd like to say that I didn't ask you?
No, it's universal, and it's so important. It's so important. We're in this world for people, to live with people, to enjoy nature, to enjoy the fruits of nature, and to be happy and live a good life. And you can't do that if you're thrown away. And it's as painful to the child who's thrown away as it is to the parents who throw their children away. They suffer just as much. And so do the siblings.
I didn't know what to expect when I read the book, and I found you just an intriguing and an incredible guest. I admire your strength. I admire your courage.
Thank you.
It takes a lot to do what you did, and to recreate yourself. And are you going to write a prequel or a sequel?
I have so many things to do to help educate the world. I have a 501c cultural center that I just started for people who have been excommunicated, and for those who don't want to follow any particular religion. Everyone needs a community, and I want that I want to make that community so that there's a place for everyone in the world.
Well, you're a terrific lady, and you're a great guest, and I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you.
And with Leia, book author, entrepreneur, this is John Ricciuti from MainlineTV.org. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the program.